Good morning, everyone, and thank you for your patience. We had a bit of a delay here, and we'll explain the reason for that in a moment. Roll call, please.
Supervisor Brown.
Here.
Supervisor Jordy is absent by prearrangement. Supervisor Krosky is absent by prearrangement. Supervisor Hamburg.
Here.
Chair McCowan.
Here. Thank you, and I will invite Casey O'Neill to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We will go straight to public expression. Casey O'Neill.
Good morning. Casey O'Neill, local farmer, Vice Chair for California Growers Association, Acting Chair for Mendocino Cannabis Growers Alliance. I got a couple of subjects I just wanted to touch on briefly. First of all, I think as we move forward with this cannabis program, we really need to consider we call them farmers markets, we call them certified growers markets. The ability for farmers to interact directly with the public with their products is highly important for me as a business owner. It's currently part of the system that I rely on. It makes a huge difference both in my bottom line and in my ability to network and meet with consumers. As a vegetable farmer, I experience the same thing. I'm not a wholesale vegetable farmer. I'm a retail farmers market farmer and a community supported agriculture CSA vegetable farmer. So I would not be able to survive as a vegetable farmer without the ability to interact directly with the public. And so this is again one of those situations in which the state has shown some interest in that possibility. We've gotten permission from the state. There is going to be a special event permit for cannabis type markets or engagements. And so seeing the county move forward with that I think is extremely important. I did want to again touch on also the importance of the cottage industry being able to participate in all facets of the industry, being able to manufacture at home, make edibles, make tinctures, etc. All these things that have traditionally been happening. We had a meeting this last weekend, a MCGA meeting, and we discussed policy points and policy positions for the community. And what's very clear is that the cottage farmers don't have the ability to survive without being able to value add their products. And it's the same thing as, again, I always relate things back to my vegetable farm. The more that I'm able to add value to an individual product, the more successful I'm going to be as a farmer. And so it is very much the same for the cottage farmers here in the county. The last thing I'd like to touch on is track and trace. It's too late in the season to try to get it going. I've talked to farmers who have been to the track and trace meeting, and the program is still very flawed. They haven't worked out the kinks, and the onerousness of the requirements essentially make it so that you would need to have an employee who does nothing but track and trace. And this late in the season, as we're getting into harvest time, you're asking people to make some really tricky decisions about, well, do I let my crop rot on the vine while I'm entering data into the computer, or do I harvest my crop and shine the data? And so, essentially what it's going to come down to is farmers losing sleep because they have to stay up late at night to do the track and trace. So thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to comment.
Thank you. Ron Edwards, followed by Paul Hansberry, and I'll put out a cautionary note. We will only have a quorum until about 9:50.
Okay. Ron Edwards, Willits. I wanted to follow up with what Casey was talking about. The farmers markets are a great way to let small farmers start to interact and start building their brand, which is the responsibility of a business owner. They can take that small brand that they can build here and then either find that it works statewide or not, which follows into my other point about track and trace. As Casey said, the compliance that it takes to do that, we knew track and trace was coming with the state. We were able to plan our business, we were able to gather information, what that position is going to cost to figure out when we have to hire somebody to do that track and trace. Again, you're aware that the two track and trace systems. My question, and really I understand that if I am a business licensed in Mendocino and I do work in Sonoma County, I need a business license in that city. I know that if I'm in Sonoma County and I do business here, I need a business license, but I don't know how Mendocino can force businesses that are not doing business in Mendocino to participate in a Mendocino program. which is the way the track and trace program works. As I've mentioned numerous times, we are not a consuming county. We are an export county. Our products go to Santa Rosa for processing because we don't have those facilities here. And requiring businesses to enroll in our program here, why? What is the point of paying extra money to enroll here when they can get product from Humboldt, from Yolo, or Monterey, or somewhere else, and not have to have the hassle? We all know the state system is coming. We are all prepared for that, but this is just a burden. It is not set up correctly to follow nurseries, and I don't know why it needs to be a burden at this time of year. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Hansberry. And is there anyone else to address the board under public expression? Okay, so Thad Van Buren will be our last speaker under public expression.
Good morning, Paul Hansberry. When you're talking, taxes are very different from fees, and in the discussion that you want to have about fees, I think that perhaps taxes should be included. The ballot measure that allowed for taxes was during very uncertain times. We didn't know if 64 was going to pass for adult use, and it did include medical and adult use for taxation. The taxation that's come across that's as part of this, it shows me that if I'm up to 2,500 square feet, I better make $50,000 in gross receipts, because after that is when the 2.5% kicks in. If I'm doing 5,000 square feet, I'd better make $100,000 in gross receipts, because after that is when the 2.5% kicks in. By the way, our gross receipts were only $30,000 last year. So that makes my tax rate at closer to 5% than 2.5. This is, as far as adult use for taxation and medical, it's called a business tax, but let's not put a lipstick on the pig. I mean, this is a sin tax. Broccoli, lavender, grapes, they don't have a business tax for square footage of cultivation. So with medicine, is the sin getting sick? With medicine, is the sin making medicines for sick people? I can understand on some level for adult use the sin tax, but there's no sin in, well, medicine, there's just medical. There's no sin in medical. And I would, perhaps the taxation rate for medical might be something along the lines of what the banks pay in interest, like 0.5%, if it's mandated. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Van Buren's comment is actually to agenda item 4C on the consent calendar. And I will note we had a modification to the agenda. Item 8A, approval of scope of work for 5 vested 911 positions with analytics project, contract number 4156-6, authorization for the sheriff to sign the scope of work, accepting its terms and authorizing the state to expend funds on the county's behalf to purchase the E911 system, authorization for the purchasing agent to sign a purchase order for the E911 system, and authorize the staff to execute any and all necessary documents related to the transaction. So that item will be added to the consent calendar. And before we take up consideration of the consent calendar, I will go to County Council for an explanation of the delay in getting started, and it relates to some last-minute corrections to item 4C, the cannabis ordinance. County Council?
Thank you, Chair McCowan. After I was provided a transcript of the last board meeting, and there was a lot of back and forth. Sometimes it's difficult to make sure we're following the will of the board, but after reviewing the transcript, there were a couple of changes that I believed were agreed on, certainly by all persons present, which would be the majority of the board and the direction of the board. So we have, Mr. Kudrowski has done a great job of quickly adding the language that was discussed at that meeting. I don't think it in any way substantially changes our summary of the ordinance, but if you look on page 3 and on page 7, page 7's fairly minor, and page 3 was discussed many times. It was language that was suggested by Supervisor McCowan, and I did verify that both Supervisor Brown and Supervisor Hamburg expressed that they agreed with that language. So,
Thank you. And so therefore, we have a red line version that shows the two changes referenced, which are in the public binder and I believe online, as well as the clean copy. And again, it's in the nature of corrections that reflect board direction. And supervisors, any comment on that situation before we go forward? So as it stands currently, item 4C is on the consent calendar. Before we go to a motion, we have public comment to the consent calendar from Thad Van Buren on item 4C.
Good morning. I'm Thad Van Buren. I'm chair of the Westport MAC. Our community is concerned about implementation of the medical marijuana ordinance. I'd like to stress some issues that we've conveyed to you in a few letters. Based on these concerns, we urge you to remove the ordinance revision from the consent calendar and reschedule it for public comment on September 12th. Our community supports regulation of the cannabis industry and feels the ordinance is generally sound. However, concerns exist about apparent deviations from the scope certified in the environmental document, as well as the lack of transparency in the permit process. A key concern is that small grows are being inappropriately expanded under Phase 1. For example, application 111 near Westport proposes expanding a tiny grow into a huge industrial greenhouse operation. This new industrial use is incompatible with the UR zoning definitions and the CC&Rs for the subdivision. It also reflects a huge departure from the historic cultivation on this parcel. Building permits for 5 greenhouses exceeding 10,000 square feet are in construction, yet no residence, water supply, septic system are in process as required. The lack of transparency is also a concern. The safety of neighbors is put at risk, yet permits are kept secret and our complaints go unanswered. How do we verify the outcomes of zoning reviews and the adequacy of mitigation conditions that are not supplied? Why is a vast expansion of use in Phase 1 not denied because it is effectively a new project? Must we wait until impacts accumulate or armed thugs terrorize our community before these concerns are addressed? We urge you to instruct the county staff that Phase 1 permits should only cover existing operations, not radical expansions. We also recommend requiring use permits for new projects that expand cultivation footprints during Phases 2 and 3 in residential districts. Neighbors deserve some avenue to express legitimate concerns and weigh in on proposed mitigation measures before the development ensues. We also feel CC&R should be considered in the permit approval process. Thank you for considering our input.
Thank you. Is there any further public comment to the consent calendar? See no one come forward. And I would just say that the changes requested would not allow the board to go forward today if they were discussed and incorporated. This is not going to be the only opportunity to revise this ordinance. I'm pretty confident. So With that said, board members, comments or motion?
You want to go?
I-
Go ahead.
My comment is, we have this happening all over the county, and I've had many phone calls. So, I feel very strongly, like the MAC does, that this is something that has to be considered in the future as we go forward in revising.
Mr. Chairman, if I might.
And Supervisor Hamburg?
Yeah, and I want to echo both my colleagues, Supervisor Brown, in saying that we are seeing these problems around the county. I find that some of these situations really need referral to our code enforcement, or specifically cannabis enforcement unit. Some of the things you described do not sound to me like they are within the parameters of the ordinance as I understand it. So I'm really wondering whether Mr. Taylor should, Trent Taylor should be contacted, or those in his unit, because those do not sound like legal expansions that you're talking about. And the other thing I want to just underscore is what Chair McCowan said, which is that this is not the last rodeo, the last bite at the apple. This is a movie, but also for the people who are just trying to live their lives peaceably and fruitfully here in Mendocino County. So thank you for coming and making your comments. I appreciate it. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be glad to make the motion for the consent calendar's adoption.
Which includes item 8A as well, as stated.
Oh, including item 8A.
And recognizing the corrections.
Yes, and recognizing the corrections to item 4C.
Second.
So we have a motion by Supervisor Hamburg, second by Supervisor Brown. We will vote by the button.
Motion carries with Supervisor Jordy and Supervisor Krosky absent by prearrangement.
Thank you. We will now go to item number 5A, discussion and possible action to consider options regarding conducting a public hearing on September 12th, 18th, or 19th, 2017, to review proposed amendments to the master fee schedule, including a tiered application permit fee for cottage industry cultivation of cannabis, and to consider other amendments to cannabis program-related fees as necessary. The Executive Office is the sponsor, and I will go to CEO Angelo, but I will also state my understanding that we're merely discussing procedure and scheduling of this item. We are not discussing the nitty-gritty of fee revisions.
That's right.
At this meeting.
Chair McCowan, that's right. This item is purely direction from the board. The direction was that we come back to have a discussion, and then we would do the fee hearing at a later date. One of the options we're proposing today to this board is that we schedule the fee hearing for September 12th with options for this board on September 12th to choose, so that instead of having two meetings, we actually could have the fee hearing on September 12th. That's all this item is. So it's just needing clear direction from this board.
Thank you. Supervisor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would like to move to authorize a public hearing on September 12th, 2017 to consider amendments to the master fee schedule, including a tiered application permit fee for cottage industry cultivation of cannabis at less than the full cost of services as previously directed by the Board of Supervisors, and to consider other amendments to the cannabis program related fees as necessary.
Second.
Motion by Supervisor Brown, second by Supervisor Hamburg. Is there public comment to the motion? A couple of thumbs up, so we'll bring it back to the board. We will vote by the button.
Motion carries with Supervisor Jordy and Supervisor Krosky absent by prearrangement.
Thank you. And does that bring us to closed session? And do we have labor?
Chair McCowan, no, there's no labor today.
We do have item 9B.
Yes, we do.
Pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9A, conference with legal counsel, existing litigation, Joan H. Turner versus County of Mendocino, Doug Losack, an individual, Mendocino County Superior Court case number SCUK CVJ 15-0065679-000. So we will reconvene in closed session in about 4 minutes. My little light came on. Good morning. We are reconvening in open session. The board met regarding item 9B pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9A, conference with legal counsel, existing litigation, Joan H. Turner versus County of Mendocino, and Douglas Losack as an individual. Direction was given to staff. Any further comments by the board? We are adjourned.